The 10 things every American should know about the Federal Reserve, then kind of that Woody Allen asterisk, but we're afraid to ask, or never knew, or we're busy watching the football game and never asked. So here's that list now. I'll read all 10. The Federal Reserve System is a privately owned banking cartel. The truth is the privately owned central bank is owned by the banks that are members of the Federal Reserve System. We do not know how much of the system each bank owns because that has never been disclosed to the American people. No right to know. Number 2, the Federal Reserve System is a perpetual debt machine. You probably heard about that too, how every dollar issued comes back to the Federal Reserve in the form of interest. But there's some interesting quotes in here I've never heard, maybe you've never heard them, from Thomas Edison, of all people, back in the early part of the 20th century. He was in the New York Times at the time saying, "That is to say, under the old way, anytime we wish we could add to the national wealth, we are compelled to add to the national debt." Now, that's what Henry Ford wants to prevent. He thinks it's stupid, and so do I, that for the loan of $30 million of our own money, the people of the United States should be compelled to pay $66 million. That is what it amounts to, with interest. That's double the amount of the loan and a little bit extra in interest. And he says it's bad, but somehow it's become accepted. We got used to it, didn't we? Number 3, the Federal Reserve has destroyed more than 96% of the value of the dollar. I know we have a graph, I don't recall who made it. It's been out there for years with the design of the dollar bill showing that destruction of the purchasing power of your dollar. You've heard Ron Paul talking about it, and it's true. You took what used to be the dollar when it was on a true gold standard, gold and silver standard in the early part of the 20th century, and how since 1913 it's had some ups and downs, but overall, it's been a 96% decline of total value. Number 4, the Federal Reserve can bail out whoever it wants with no accountability. And the partial audit they finally got in Congress revealed that it's all the big banks of Wall Street and pretty much all the big banks of Europe. Go figure. Number 5, the Federal Reserve is paying banks not to lend money. Now, what does that mean? Section 128 of the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act of 2008 allows the Federal Reserve to pay interest on excess reserves that the bank parks at the Fed. So what happened? You had no excess reserves up until that act was passed in 2008. Now you have $1.5 trillion in there. The banks are putting the money in there, gaining interest payments, collecting their own money, and not loaning it out to people, not loaning it to small businesses, not allowing any kind of economic recovery. There isn't one. Paul Craig Roberts is going to talk about that later, what a hoax that is. Number 6, the Federal Reserve creates artificial economic bubbles that are extremely damaging. Do you remember that their whole mandate for being created was that they were going to stop the fluctuations, the spikes, the bust and booms, the market crashes? They didn't do any of that. The greatest crash ever, the economic depression of the late 20s, of the 30s, was created by the Federal Reserve. It wasn't stopped by them. They contracted the money supply and some other fishy moves after they crashed Wall Street. Number 7, the Federal Reserve System is dominated by the big Wall Street banks. Now, that should be obvious at that point, especially after the partial audit. However, I believe Jamie Dimon is on the board of reserves, and also, of course, Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner came from there. At the very best, we're talking about a very, very corrupt revolving door system, but we know it's far worse than just revolving door problems. Number 8, it is not an accident that we saw the personal income tax and the Federal Reserve System both come into existence in 1913, so they could collect that interest money that Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, and so many other Americans, whether they're good, bad, indifferent, colored, corrupt themselves, whatever. It was 1913 they began to turn the lights out on the American dream. Not that we were ever perfect, not that we ever achieved that dream, but they turned us instead towards that Soviet model, toward the rule by central authority model, rule by private entities controlling the government, not by a government responsible to the democratic people of the country through reserved, limited powers under a republic. Number 9, the current Federal Reserve Chairman, Ben Bernanke, has a nightmarish track record of incompetence. Well, that can't be true. Number 10, the Federal Reserve has become way too powerful. Or was it always too powerful and completely unconstitutional?